All right, it is Thursday, July 1st, 2021, and this is the Fight Business Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Auger, and today we're talking all things business regarding UFC 265. We're going to talk about the interim heavyweight title between Ciryl Gane and Derrick Lewis and why that matchup was made. We'll talk about Hunter Campbell's involvement in that, chief business officer of the UFC. What does he have to do with this? Why are certain well-named journalists and fighters calling him out? We'll break that down and his involvement in all of this. We'll talk about Dana White and Francis Ngannou's agent going back and forth on social media and getting into quite a heated argument, as well as Francis Ngannou chiming in about the interim heavyweight title fight as well, being made so soon after he just defended the belt. Then we'll be talking about Amanda Nunes, the reigning defending women's 135 and 145-pound champion, is defending one of her belts at UFC 265 and yet is relegated to the co-main. Why is that happening? I'll break that down for you. We'll also touch on the PFL playoffs a little bit and break down what it means for the business, since their bigger signings didn't make the playoffs, not all of them anyway. And is that good? Is that bad? What does that all mean from a business perspective? And lastly, we'll briefly touch on the UFC hosting an official watch party for UFC 264. Why am I covering this? Well, I'll let you know towards the end here, but you can expect to see more of these, I'm guessing, and it might become a bigger deal, especially with big pay-per-views like those headlined by Conor McGregor. So with that in mind, go ahead and check the timestamps out at the bottom if you want to skip anywhere, as always, and let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, so first off, let's talk about the interim heavyweight title fight. That is the main event at UFC 265. So shortly after Ciryl Gane got a unanimous decision win over Alexander Volkov, it was announced by the UFC that the promotion will be doing Derrick Lewis versus Ciryl Gane at UFC 265 on August 7th. Now, this was a shock to fans. Almost every single media member I know personally, we were all shocked by this. Francis Ngannou, right? Obviously shocked by this. Tweeting out, oh, I remember when I got the interim strap when he fought Rosenstruck. Oh, wait, being sarcastic about all of it. It's very interesting. Very, very interesting. Let's break down first why this was made, speculation as to why it was made anyway. And then we'll talk about Hunter Campbell's involvement and kind of go from there. As we know, social media, everything kind of spiraled out of control. So this fight was made for a couple of reasons, I think. UFC press release came out very recently, yesterday, talking about a multi-event partnership with the Toyota Center in Houston, which is where UFC 265 is being held. So they announced, yes, we're doing UFC 265. We're also going to do another pay-per-view in 2022. And with that in mind, right, that's kind of a rare thing. You haven't seen that type of partnership with venues all that recently anyway. I mean, obviously there's been the pandemic, but before that, it's still not something that's a common occurrence. When you announce a partnership like this, it means obviously it's important to the promotion, important to the venue, and you're going to want hometown stars, right? UFC 265 at this point couldn't be moved. And the biggest hometown star that Houston has is Derrick Lewis. So I think that does play a factor in all of this. I think Lewis is a perfect representation of what both the Toyota Center would like as a hometown star in the UFC, as well as the UFC would be happy with Lewis winning the belt in his hometown of Houston. I mean, he's on the cusp of being a breakout UFC star. And what I mean by that is he's not going to be an Izzy. He's not going to be a John Jones or a McGregor or crossover star or anything like that. But he's popular within the hardcore fan base, as well as outside of the hardcore fan base for some of his, social media. If you haven't checked out his social media, he's hilarious. He's got a personality, right? He's got a lot of X factors going for him that if he were to win a belt, albeit interim, it still could end up gaining a lot of momentum, right? he's had the famous promos about, my balls was hot, and had the, momentum going into that Daniel Cormier fight. Obviously, he lost that. But if he were able to get past Gane here and get the belt, it'd be kind of like another Francis Ngannou situation, where Ngannou had a massive amount of momentum going into the first Stipe fight, right? Was really looking at becoming a breakout star if he gets past Stipe, especially with some of the knockouts he was laying down, all of that. And then Stipe just out wrestled him and just beat him soundly, 50-44. And Ngannou lost a lot of his star power. Went on a tear, did Francis Ngannou things with his just crazy knockout power, knocked out a ton of people very quick, comes back, beats Stipe in emphatic fashion. And then since that win has really gotten much more attention from the media, has been promoted more within the sport, it's been a bigger thing. Now, I think he's in the new Fast and Furious movie, right? He's gotten a bit of a push. He still lost a lot of his opportunity. I've talked about that before, where, you only really get one or two shots at crossover superstardom. And I think, unfortunately, Francis's first shot anyway, passed him by when he lost Stipe the first time around, because there wasn't nearly as much hype going in the second time. And he's gained a lot of fans. He is popular, but he's not on the level that we all thought he was going to be if he got past Stipe first time around. So, it definitely took a hit, but he still has gotten a boost from winning the title, is the point. Derrick Lewis, same type of thing. He had that infamous "My Balls is Hot" promo on a McGregor card, so all eyes were on him. He had a lot of good jokes going on. He has that personality. And then he got whooped by Cormier at UFC 230. And, if he were to come back and win the title here, I don't think he becomes a big crossover star, or even at the level, again, as I've said before, of John Jones or, Izzy. But it would certainly give him a boost and make him a bigger draw than most people. And that's what the UFC is trying to do with just about everybody, right? If they can't get that mega stardom, they certainly want as much drawing power out of people as they can get. Anything above average is a win in the UFC's books, especially with the ESPN deal and them trying to feed this money into Endeavor. They need any win they can get. So that's a very big part of this. I think it being in Houston, they wanted Derrick Lewis on the card. They wanted it to be a big deal. There you go. You have an interim title fight against Ciryl Gane. The reason they picked Gane, right, over Stipe, I believe, is that Gane obviously has a lot of popularity with him too. Right now, he hasn't put on, the most exciting performances in terms of crazy knockouts or, super submissions. He's had a couple of those, keep in mind, but he's also had some more plotting decisions or technical decisions, right? And while that does hurt in some regards to the casual viewer, he's still winning consistently, and he does have a fair amount of popularity. If he ends up getting past Lewis, which I would favor him to do in this particular matchup, that's a big deal as being France's first UFC interim champion. Yes, it's interim, but of course they'll promote it as though he's, first UFC champion from France, Ciryl Gane. Even though, again, the interim title is used however the promotion sees fit. So whether that be, yes, we want to just say this is a placeholder and we want our big star over here to hold the spotlight, or whether we want to say, hey, yeah, he's a champion, right? He is a true champion, all that stuff, even though it's an interim belt, they'll do it as they choose. And they can, because they have all of the cards in regards to the belts. The promotion can do whatever they want with it. I mean, they made a BMF belt for Jorge Masvidal, right? And Nate Diaz, but you get what I'm saying. So in this case, I think if Gane wins, it makes a lot of sense to promote him as the first French UFC champion. And I think it also would help boost Gane's popularity quite a bit. How much so? I don't know. I still don't think he's going to reach an Izzy level or a John Jones level, but he could definitely be a much more solid draw than most. I could see him, consistently bringing in anywhere from 450 to 500K pay-per-view buys with a win over Lewis and getting that belt. Will it happen? Who knows? But I can understand why the UFC wants to put Gane in that position. You could tell, right, when Gane had that decision win over Rosenstruck, Dana White was upset. He was like, this is supposed to be your coming out party, and you do that? Well, and went on a little rant. That's partially because he wanted Gane to do something exciting. He wanted Gane to do something similar to what he did against JDS. He wanted a finish. He wanted, to keep building that hype train. Because those decisions hurt a little bit, but they still win is a win, right? And as long as it's not completely boring, which Gane really isn't boring if you know technique and you're able to watch what he does, he certainly has some excellent skill. That's how he's gotten past so many people already in the way he has. But it's not the knockouts or the crazy submissions or the things that the casual fan gets drawn in by being like, whoa, that's crazy, right? So with Gane now getting his opportunity at a belt, I think the promotion really wants one of two scenarios. They want Derrick Lewis to go out there and land a big shot and, in his hometown, boost him up quite a bit. Or they want Gane to go out there and put the moves on Derrick Lewis and finish him, which I believe could also happen. Could it go to a decision? Sure. But I could easily see Gane finishing Lewis as well. Either way, it's going to elevate one of those guys. And given the multi-deal partnership with the Toyota Center, given what they're trying to do from a schedule standpoint, since they've had a lot of pay-per-views where they've had 3 title fights or 2 title fights, right? Jacksonville was kind of a, hey, we're back from COVID, so we're going to do a big event with 3 title fights. That messes up the schedule because they really are consistently trying to keep with at least 1 title fight per pay-per-view. And I think, again, that's probably due to whatever deal they have with ESPN, where the only person so far that's headlined anything without a pay-per-view, without a title for a pay-per-view has been McGregor, which he's special. It makes sense. It's probably an exception. Anyone else, though, that hasn't happened. There's always been some title on the line. And generally, I think it would make sense if ESPN had said, hey, for all pay-per-view events, you at least have to have one title on the line. We don't care what it is, but there needs to be a title fight. Because the title fight does boost, it's ever so slight, right? But it does boost kind of the casual viewership a little bit. And it does, regardless of who's fighting for the title, it makes it more important. It does increase casual viewership. There's a small correlation there. So makes sense that they're going to do that. Let's talk about Hunter Campbell's involvement in all this. So, I mentioned it, I believe, a couple weeks ago or a week ago during some other videos we did, where Hunter is a well-known name throughout the insiders of the sport. He's the chief business officer of the UFC. He is the guy that gets the deals done. He's a lawyer, right? And he's chief legal counsel too, is what he was originally hired for back when the promotion was sold from Zuffa to Endeavor. But he is the guy that does the deals between fighters. It's not Dana and a fighter negotiating. It's Hunter and a fighter negotiating offer, right? John Jones, not long ago, was talking about, his interaction with Hunter and how, he wanted to be compensated fairly, wanted half of Deontay Wilder's purse, all that stuff, right? When he was trying to angle for the Ngannou fight, he mentioned Hunter's name specifically because that's who agents and managers and all of that are dealing with. It's Hunter. White, I don't think pretty much gets involved anymore. Maybe for McGregor, maybe for Diaz, some of the really big name stars, sure, he might step in at that point, but otherwise, that's not really what he's doing. He leaves that all up to Hunter Campbell. And so Ariel Helwani takes to Twitter, and now that he's off of the ESPN muzzle, right, he goes ahead and he just says, hey, you'd be surprised how much this happens with Hunter saying you're going to strip people and negotiating all this stuff. And he just, back to old Helwani, back to the old Helwani we know that likes to stir the pot, likes to leak secrets, all that type of stuff. The guy that had that type of reporting that eventually got picked up by ESPN. He's been kind of reserved, which is understandable because you've got the broadcast partner for the promotion. I'm sure he had restrictions. That's a discussion for another time. But, he just goes out there and puts it out there on Twitter about what Hunter's MO is. And from what I have heard, that is accurate. I had heard that before as well. I didn't have enough knowledge and close sources I could trust to say like, oh yeah, that's definitely true. I'd overheard it in some conversations or it had been brought up once or twice, but I didn't have good sources. So I wasn't going to go out there and say that. But that is consistent with what I have heard. So Hunter, it takes a position in these offers, right? Assuming the MO is true. And that's what we're using for the rest of this discussion is we're assuming that MO that Helwani put up is true. He often threatens to strip or talks about arranging certain dates or making, certain payments out to people because it's pure business for him. I've talked about it many a time. The UFC runs off of numbers, especially since they sold to Endeavor. But even before Endeavor, there was a little bit more leeway here and there, right? But especially since they've sold to Endeavor, and now that Endeavor is public, the UFC runs off of numbers. They look at what a fighter's drawing power is. They look at scheduling out the events and how to maximize their gate revenue, as well as their marketing revenue, as well as their pay-per-view buys across multiple events. They are data-driven. And Hunter, based on that MO, is the exact type of data-driven leader that a business wants. Where, as Helwani says, he doesn't make a lot of calls out of emotion. He's more like Lorenzo in that regard, Lorenzo Fertitta, who apparently was the same way, which, again, consistent with what I had heard. But it's all about numbers. It's all about dollars and cents. And so when you're looking through it at that lens, you are literally disregarding the court of public opinion, the fans, the fighters, whoever. Emotions are gone. It's literally about how can I maximize my value? How do I get my return on investment to its maximum point? And that leads to some ruthless decisions and some decisions that make a lot of people mad and angry. But at the end of the day, internally, it's celebrated, right? The UFC loves the fact that Hunter's willing to strip people of titles or threaten to strip people of titles if they don't fight when they're supposed to, according to their schedule. Or, the fact that he may work out hard negotiations in terms of pay for particular fighter contracts or for one-offs, or apparently with what's going on with John, but also for different fighter contracts because it's just lower cost on the UFC's end. They love that. Endeavor celebrates it because that's more money that they get to take and help them keep afloat while they're trying to get these other businesses off the ground. Externally, those people, and I've seen this happen at many, many firms, not just the UFC, doesn't matter the industry, really across most, if not all industries. There are always those types of straight data-driven numbers people that are ruthless and viewed as ruthless, almost cold-hearted at times. But they are celebrated internally. They're almost never the people that get fired, demoted, any of that stuff. Usually they just keep getting promoted because at the end of the day, they get results. And that's what the business cares about. Because whether it's the internal shareholders, your creditors, whoever, you want those people to be happy above all else. In most cases, it's just kind of the way business works, right? If I'm a public company, yes, I want my shareholders to be happy. I want to keep their stock rising and rising and rising, because then they're going to be happy with me. Do I have to break a few rules here? Do I have to do things that are maybe I shouldn't have to, but how many times have we seen companies do this? How many times have we seen a company had some scandal where they broke some rule, or they had a lawsuit, or they did whatever, but the share price was just skyrocketing and people were just like, it's whatever, and it blows over? Most major conglomerates have at least one pretty major scandal, and it's usually just forgotten within however many years, because at the end of the day, the shareholders are okay with it as long as their money is growing. That's what it comes down to. Now, if you're doing that and then the shares price tanks, you're going to have heads roll. That happens a lot of the time, right? We've seen that happen a bunch. And usually even with a major scandal, you'll probably have a preemptive head roll and all that stuff just in case. But point is, Hunter Campbell is that type of guy. He is the corporate dude that will go in and be ruthless, but get the results that the CEO, the presidents, the board of directors, the large shareholders will all love. And they'll say, no, you're keeping him. He gets results. I don't care about X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. He gets results. And that's probably why he's in the position he's in. It's probably why he deals with the fighters. If he can be detached and cold and just say, nope, dollars and cents, got to make these schedules line up, got to make sure that we have certain title fights happening. You're not going to fight then? Well, okay, bye. He's more than willing to do it. Okay. Because also then the other members of the company aren't the bad guys, right? They can come to the fighter's aid and be like, oh man, yeah, that's crazy. Dana, it's a little bit harder because he's the kind of the face of the company, but some of these other high level executives can easily say, man, yeah, I'm sorry, Hunter made the call on that. And they get to save face. That's what Hunter Campbell's job is. And he does a very good job at it. It's there is no denying, based on the UFC's financials, based on some stories I've heard, which I won't repeat, but again, because I just don't feel confident enough to say, like, yes, these are pretty accurate descriptions and all of that. He's a guy that gets stuff done from a numbers perspective. Fans, fighters, managers, agents be damned. So that's his involvement in all of this. All right, so we've talked about why the interim title fight was made from a business perspective, at least internally for the UFC. We've talked about Hunter Campbell, the guy, again, from the promotion side, who is at the center of making this deal. His MO, why he's doing it, all comes down to numbers, all of that. But then you have Dana White chiming in after Francis Ngannou's agent. Let's see, his name is I'm going to butcher this. I think it's Marquel. Yeah, Marquel Martin. Okay, I'm not going to butcher it. Marquel Martin, responds to the news that the interim heavyweight title fight's been booked, saying that the team is shocked because they thought they were, working out arrangements, and that they'll, try and get clarity to the entire situation. Classic PR statement, but basically saying, yeah, this is shocking to us too. We didn't expect to see this announcement. And Dana White then takes to Instagram and says, this dude is full of shit. It's, in fact, the actual statement is, this dude is so full of shit. He knows exactly what's going on and isn't, quote unquote, shocked at all, because we told him several times this was coming. His management is incompetent, and hopefully Francis starts taking a look at new people to help his career. So White and takes a straight shot at Marquel Martin. Just right, right for him. Oof. And keep in mind, Marquel Martin used to work for the UFC, used to be an employee of the UFC. And he comes back and he says, at Dana White Law, complete shock with your decision after we said September was good for us. Complete shock that you guys made threats after less than 3 months after you all were aware. Complete shock after you knew why Francis needed more time. And he goes on to say, I know you're passionate, but why would you discredit me? All of this, incompetent management. No, I think we do a really good job, all that type of stuff. And essentially says, yes, we've got an agency behind us. I'm ready to step up. I'm ready to get blackballed. And he really holds his ground for his client, which is good and a rarity in MMA, right? We've talked about this before. A lot of MMA managers, are very much peacemakers between their fighters and the promotion. They want the promotion to like them as managers. Seems to be that the more they like you as a manager, the better deals you can get for your fighters, the better matchups, that type of thing. So a lot of managers and agents out there are very much, treading lightly when it comes to stuff like this. But Mr. Martin, no, he goes full back at White after White, clearly takes a shot at him and says, you've got incompetent management, all that. Bravo to Mr. Martin for standing his ground on this. I think that's one of those things where it shows your client that you care, that you're really trying to stick up for him, all of that, because Francis is obviously not happy with this development. And you don't want to back down, even if it causes you some strife with the promotion, because he's obviously your biggest or one of your biggest clients, right? He's still a draw. He could very well become an even bigger draw if he keeps knocking people out and holding on to that belt for a long time. It could be a big thing. So you want to make sure he's happy. And that's what agents are typically supposed to do. That's what you will normally see from agents and managers in other sports. MMA, again, it's rare because of the UFC's power, but generally, this is what you would see an agent do in any type of professional sport if a president or commissioner or whoever went after their agency and their athlete the way they did. So bravo to him for that. But that being said, it just really highlights, again, what the promotion is trying to do here, right? Internally, they've made this decision. They know it's the best for numbers. And even though they know it's going to make people upset, even though they know it's going to make Francis upset, his managers, a lot of people upset, they have to not only make that decision, but then spin the PR that it's not on them, right? Even if it's not true, the beauty about PR is that you can spin things in a way where you have, at least to a certain audience, plausible deniability. If the UFC comes out and says, no, you knew this was happening, this is crazy that you would say that. Like, we told you this was coming. Why would you even say that? Even if they knew that maybe it wasn't, or it was kind of a, negotiations where they said, wait, why? Why can't you do September? Why can't you do whatever? They're always going to put out those statements that make them look like they tried everything they could, or that, this was planned and it's the right move. Because if they don't, that can hurt their image amongst a certain subset of fans, right? Some fans will be able to see this and interpret it as, okay, this is just the UFC kind of spinning their heels. But other fans are going to say, oh, no, look, this dude's full of shit and this was planned. So that's on them. The amount of fans, UFC fans, especially casual ones, that love Dana White and are much more willing to believe him than an agent they've never heard of until this whole interaction, is pretty large. It's pretty large. So you put it out there and you leave it up to the particular viewer to interpret this back and forth. They're probably going to go with their bias. And their bias is most likely Dana White, because he's the face of the company. And it works. It's not just the UFC. It's plenty of firms do this stuff all the time. Politics, this is politics 101. If you want to talk about political scandals or issues or whatever, it's this stuff right here. You release a statement contradicting something, and you leave it up to the particular viewer of that media to then decide who to believe, and their bias will a lot of times take over, and it is what it is, regardless of which side is right. That's political spin, and that is PR, and that's what the UFC does here as well. It's part of what Dana White is doing. I talked about it last time when Endeavor went public. sorry, a couple podcasts ago. Endeavor went public. Dana White goes on Instagram and is like, the UFC is officially a public company. It's like, well, nah, kind of. I mean, I guess, but it's really more a subsidiary of a public company. You can't buy UFC stock. You can only buy Endeavor stock. There's a big difference. But they spun it as like, oh, man, now you can buy a piece of the UFC because, of course, they wanted to. And the stock went up. I would bet because a lot of people thought, man, I can own a part of the UFC. Well, yeah. Not really registering the rest of Endeavor's debts and all the other stuff. So it makes sense the promotion is going to do this, and it makes sense for White to come out and be the guy to say this because that's kind of his job as the face of the company. He's not only the president, he's also kind of the mascot. He's the UFC mascot and the PR guy. So that's what he's doing here. Now, this isn't the first time we've seen the UFC implement this type of interim title so fast after a actual belt has been defended, right? I think one of the easiest things to remember is you had the Colby Covington, Rafael dos Anjos interim title at UFC 225, and then just a couple months later, you had Tyron Woodley, defending the actual title against Darren Till at UFC 228. Why did that happen? Well, because they just wanted an interim title on there. Didn't make a lot of sense in a lot of people's eyes, and Tyron was like, what the heck's going on? But they did it. And again, was much more for marketing and promotional purposes. And there was some, confusion and fans being like, what? Like, what's going on? I mean, they've done this multiple times before. That's just one example. So the fact that they would do an interim title, especially when Ngannou just fought not that long ago, it's all from a business perspective about making the numbers work. That's really what it is. And if you gain nothing else from this whole conversation, that's the point I want to drive home. It's a business decision, and they do not care and will never care if it doesn't make sense from a merit standpoint, if it doesn't make sense from a matchup standpoint. They don't care. If it's the best value they can get, they're going to put that fight on. They're going to make it the main event. And this leads us to another thing that's been brought up, which is Amanda Nunes is fighting on this card, defending her 135-pound strap against Juliana Pena. Why is she on the co-main event? I've heard a bunch of people say, you've got the women's GOAT right here defending her strap, and you've got this goofy heavyweight title fight going on between Gane and Lewis. Why not have Nunes be the headliner? And then you do this interim title fight as a co-main if you're that dead set on putting it on. Why not do it that way? Great question. But as I just talked about, it all circles back to the same thing, numbers. At the end of the day, it's always numbers. If you look at Nunes, any pay-per-view that she's headlined hasn't been a big draw, where she's supposed to have been the A side. It's a simple fact, right? Her biggest pay-per-views were UFC 232 against Cyborg, which again, she was the co-main event. UFC 200, which she was in the main event against Miesha Tate as a last-minute change. And you were talking about a stack card with just superstar matchups all over. It was a big deal. You had Brock Lesnar coming back, all of that. She was not the draw for that card. Rousey versus Nunes, of course, she's in the main event again, does a million, but we know Rousey is the A side there. When Nunes has headlined a card, she has not done particularly well. She's had a couple, I think one or two break 300,000 or been in the 300,000 range, but she's also had some of the worst. Her fight against Raquel Pennington as the headliner is, to my knowledge, in the modern era, one of the worst pay-per-view buys numbers ever. And by modern era, I mean, Fox, all of that. Once they got on major broadcasting networks, once the UFC was showing through there. So 2011 and onward, I would say. I mean, it was bad. I think it was under 100,000. I want to say it was like 95,000 or 90K buys. Like that's very bad. And it's not that the promotion didn't push her once she actually, beat Rousey and then went on to continue winning in dominant fashion. I mean, they started to push her. They pushed her late. That's also partially on them, for sure, from a marketing perspective. But for whatever reason, she just doesn't have the drawing power that you would hope she would have, especially with her dominant performances. And really, when it comes down to it, I'm sure both the UFC and ESPN aren't super thrilled when they have to do a Nunes headliner. Will they do it? Of course. We've seen that happen, right? She's headlined a couple of cards during the pandemic. But generally, from the numbers we have, she is not a pay-per-view draw. She just really isn't. So while it makes more sense from a merit standpoint to have her be in the main event, and while she deserves to be in the main event spot for everything she's accomplished in the sport and on her current run, comes back to the numbers, as always. And the numbers don't add up for Nunes. And I know some of you are probably yelling at me like, what are you talking about? Nunes is amazing. All that. I'm not doubting her abilities. I'm not doubting her, personality, anything like that. I'm with you. But for whatever reason, she does not seem to resonate with the casual fan. And the UFC has pushed her again. They could pump more marketing into her, but that's a very risky investment at this point. Why? Again, if I'm talking just numbers, if I'm a Hunter Campbell type and I'm looking just at the data I have in front of me, why would I pump more marketing dollars in the hopes that Nunes becomes a bigger draw when we have guys on the cusp like Gane or Lewis who we can pump far less marketing into and might naturally break out anyway? Right? Return on investment, cost benefit analysis. It's what it always comes down to. And this is just another example of that. Easily just another example of that. So that's why Nunes is in the co-main. And I don't expect you'll see her headline too many main events unless it's A, filling schedule, or B, she somehow gets the attention of, mainstream media or casual audience. It's just not happening for whatever reason. And that sucks. But there are some great champions and some great fighters that just never had that drawing power, It's crappy, but what are you going to do? It happens to the best of them. So that's why she's on the co-main, and I don't foresee that changing in the future. And don't expect the UFC to pour a bunch of money into her, right? Marketing wise, it's not going to happen. They will market her and they will pour some money into it, but they're not going to keep throwing money at a fighter who is a lower draw when they can instead throw money at fighters who are already naturally becoming bigger draws and enhance their natural rise. It just doesn't make sense internally from a business perspective. So that's why they're not doing it. That's why Nunes is the co-main. Okay, so real quickly here, I want to touch on a couple of other topics outside of UFC 265. And before I do, let me know your thoughts on what I went over there. Does it all make sense to you? Do you understand why Hunter Campbell might negotiate the way he wants to? Does it make sense that Nunes is a co-main instead of a main event? Let me know, because I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on it, especially with that interim main event. Are you excited for it? Does it make sense? What do you think? Because, after I've explained it now, do you understand why they did it? Let me know. But a couple other topics to touch on here. PFL playoffs, right? Playoff brackets have been set. Regular season is over. And at the end of the regular season, we have several big offseason signees that did not make the playoffs. Anthony Pettis did not make the playoffs. Fabricio Werdum did not make the playoffs. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. These were two bigger names that they signed. that aren't going through to the playoff rounds. Rory McDonald made it through, but you've got two bigger names who are just not in the playoffs at this point. Does that help or hurt them? I've seen a lot of conflicting arguments here. Two most common being, A, it helps them because internally, right, their guys, their homegrown guys, beaten these bigger UFC guys, and you could say, look, our guys are just as good as the UFC guys. They're even better. Look, Clay Collard almost finished Pettis. He could be a star. Like he's just as good. And B, the other argument is no, it hurts them. They just paid a bunch of money for these dudes. They were supposed to become stars of the PFL, recognizable names to the casual audience, supposed to get belts, do their thing, and they didn't even make it to the playoffs. So which argument do you think is right? Well, let's break it down very quickly. Argument A. It is good from a perception perspective that the homegrown talent was able to beat people like Pettis, right? And keep in mind, that doesn't really apply to Werdum's situation. That's an important, because that wasn't an offseason signee too. But point being is that it shows that some of the bigger names can lose in the tournament, that the PFL is serious. It's not just a lesser league where a veteran, a former champion can come in from the UFC and dominate, right? That's not the case. So from perception-wise, it makes sense. On the other hand, you did spend a lot of money signing these guys. And for them to lose, not only, in not the best way, but especially before the playoffs take off, that means that a lot of the casual audience is going to be checked out for the playoffs, right? If I'm a Pettis guy, if I'm an Anthony Pettis guy, or I'm a Werdum guy, or let's just say I'm a semi-casual or hardcore UFC fan who is willing to watch the PFL because I know those UFC names. So I'm like, okay, you know what? I kind of want to see, this is on a different night than the UFC. I want to see more fights. Oh, here's a guy I know. All right, let's check it out. There's a chance that I look at what Clay Collard did and I say, oh, okay, like this guy could be cool. All right, I'll become a fan. And I'm sure there is some conversion there, but there's also probably a chance that they're just like, man, Pettis is washed up. Like, no wonder the UFC let him go. I'm going to go back to my UFC world, right? And now you've got the playoffs coming up, which, mind you, are weeks away, a ways away. And I no longer, as that semi-casual MMA fan or hardcore UFC fan who's been branching out a little bit, I no longer have names to grab onto. I no longer have like, oh, right, I want to watch the tournament to see if Pettis can get it done. Or I want to watch to see if Werdum can get it done. They still got Rory, so you'll have some of that, but Rory's also been over in Bellator. So it's not a UFC transplant. It's at this point, I think there's been enough time elapsed that it's more of a UFC vet, Bellator vet, former Bellator champion, now over there. So it's not the same draw exactly. So then it becomes hard. It becomes hard to, as a hardcore UFC person or someone that doesn't dabble too much outside of the UFC, it becomes hard for me to watch the tournament. Because, I might check it out while it's on. If I watch Clay beat Pettis, maybe I watch Clay, but I'm probably not going to watch the other fights and nights as well. Whereas if Pettis is still in it, if Werdum is still in it, or if I'm a Rory fan, and in which case this does apply, I might start watching the other fights and kind of, becoming more of a fan of it because, okay, I'm getting more invested here. I'm able to know that my fighter is still winning. I'm going to be more exposed to the product. It's product exposure, right? It's billboard advertising in a way where the more you see it, subconscious or not, you at least recognize it. You know what it is. Think about how many car commercials or how many things you hate that you're blasting. You hate the jingle. You don't care for it, but you know oh yeah, I know that, or whatever. It's exposure, product exposure. So I am in favor of argument B, that it hurts them more than it helps them, because they did spend a lot of money on these guys and they're less likely to get that exposure to the people who then may become, you know what? I watch UFC. I'm a semi-casual MMA guy. I'll start watching the PFL because I want to see Pettis do well. I want to see some of my favorite guys do well. I think it's bad that Werdum, especially Werdum in the way he lost, are out of the tournament. You still got Rory, but other than that, you're kind of, it's not the same. I think Pettis makes it to the playoffs and makes a good run. I think Werdum makes a good run. You have more exposure and you're capturing more of that audience, which is ultimately why you sign those fighters. You sign them to build more PFL's audience. Now, what I will say real quickly to wrap up this segment is that I think, some of the former champions being knocked out is good, right? Like Lance Palmer not making it and Natan Schultz not making it. I think that's good for the PFL internally because, and from an audience perspective, because I think that was part of the tournament format, right? Is they designed it not expecting a lot of repeat champions. Or if you had repeat champions, okay, you had a couple years, but that was kind of the thrill of the tournament, right? If you know who's going to win the tournament every time, you're less likely to tune in. It gets boring. Now seeing even no-name guys that you don't know come up and beat former champions, back-to-back champions, that's good for the PFL. That means that they're building the right talent, and that spices it up. Because suddenly it's not the Lance Palmer show at 145. It's not the Natan Schultz show at 155. No, it's anybody's game. And that makes it more exciting. That makes that tournament feel, more like a thrill. It's a complaint with the college football playoffs, if you want to draw comparisons to that, where it's always Alabama or Ohio State or Clemson that are always in the playoffs because they're always so good and they're always winning. And a lot of people hate that. And now they're expanding the playoffs and people are, there's a whole joke about it. There's an ad where they have a woman dressed up as the playoffs saying, I need to see other people besides just you guys because I want variety. Like, yeah, people do hate that. Unless you're an Alabama fan or Ohio State fan or Clemson fan or what have you, or LSU, you're probably like, yeah, this sucks. Because it's always the same couple teams up there. Having other teams pull off upsets and get their spots, it's a big deal. Doesn't make sense business-wise, and it kind of hurts you business-wise when, again, you sign somebody like Pettis and then they don't make the playoffs. But when you have an internal homegrown guy like Palmer lose or Schultz lose, that's helpful. That brings spice and variety. So that's where you get more of argument A, I think, in those scenarios, not to the external UFC vets. All right, that brings me to the last thing I want to touch on real quick, which is the official UFC 264 watch party being held at the MGM Gardens. And this was in a press release also announced yesterday. So this is interesting in a couple ways. There have been official or semi-official watch parties. I don't know if they've been official and they just haven't been promoted super well, or if they have been like, oh, we're calling it an official watch party because we've hired a couple fighters to come sign autographs and do some things, that type of deal. But this has been going on for a while, right? Makes sense to do if somebody can't attend an event live, or if they're in town but tickets are sold out, or they just can't afford tickets, they can go to a bar and spend money at the establishment of wherever the party is being sold, do all that type of stuff in order to watch the fights with fighters. It's a mini fan experience. Makes total sense. The interesting part here is the way they're promoting this one. Tickets go on sale today, I believe, and it's really announced as like an event, right? Kind of like you would have the not the VIP experience, but the experience that comes with the pay-per-view where you're out in the parking lots. It's escaping the name of me right now. I don't know why I'm tired. But where you before the fights, you end up going out in line and getting autographs or pictures with other fighters that aren't participating fan experience. That's the name. The fan experience at pay-per-views that we've seen across the years. It's kind of like that, but instead it's an official watch party. And it makes sense for them to do this because you've got McGregor-Poirier, which sold out like that, especially after the pandemic. Makes sense. Big trilogy. Makes all the sense in the world. You've got that fight headlining and tickets going so fast that I'm sure there are a ton of people that would love to still come to Vegas, or, we're already planning on going to Vegas or live in Vegas, that want to see the fights. So why not partner up, do an official sponsorship, official party, and get some revenue out of that? Because they're going to charge some ridiculous fee at the door. I mean, never mind. There's tickets. What am I talking about? There's tickets on sale for it. So there's going to be a price just to get in. And then you're going to buy food, you're going to buy a drink, all that stuff. More than likely, UFC is going to see most of the ticket revenue. And then the food and drink will all be handled by the restaurant. There might be a split, depends on how they work it out. But maybe it's something along the lines of, hey, you can put on the fights here for free. We take the ticket revenue, you get food and drink. Or we split ticket revenue. You still have to pay your normal fee to Johan Promotions to watch and set up the fights on the bar. But then we split the ticket revenue and part of the drinks, or you get food, all that. There's lots of different ways you can negotiate that. But it makes sense that the UFC would do this. I expect them to have many more official watch parties, especially if this one is a success, which it should be. But they're going to try it out for a bit, I would imagine, because it's just free revenue for them. All they have to do is have a couple fighters, say, I don't know who makes sense. Depends. Maybe people in town or upcoming fighters. You could have Gane and Derrick Lewis there if you wanted to make it a big thing, or one of them, right? But UFC will call up a couple fighters and say, hey, media obligations, we need you to come and do this. Can you do it? And fighters will inevitably, a couple will say, sure. We'll show up and they'll watch the fights. They'll probably get paid a little bit, do all that stuff. And UFC makes money. It's a no-brainer. With a giant card like McGregor versus Poirier 3, it's a no-brainer. And for the very big pay-per-views, I expect more official watch parties. It's something they probably should have done a while ago, or they have been doing and they just haven't promoted in the same way. But it's free revenue for them, right? These watch parties are going to happen. You are always going to have people going to bars to watch fights like this that couldn't get there live. By charging people to go to those bars to watch the fights, and all you have to do is send a couple of fighters there, which, again, as a promotion, you don't care. You just need a couple to go ahead and go there. And you'll probably have one employee or two employees, events coordinators or staff go there and kind of run it a little bit, but it's very low cost on your end. And the revenue could be huge depending on where you host it and how many people go. No brainer. So expect more of these in the future. That's why I pointed it out. All right, guys. Well, that wraps it up for another episode of the Fight Business Podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure to give that a like, subscribe, and bell notification if you haven't done that already. If you're listening on Anchor, Spotify, Podcast Addict, Apple Podcasts, what have you, love you guys. Make sure to hit me up on Twitter or Instagram. More likely to get me on Twitter to let me know you're listening to this stuff. I always appreciate it. Let me know your thoughts and feelings about what I covered. Obviously, heavy on UFC 265. It's been a crazy couple days with all that stuff coming out. I wanted to explain the business side of that. Let me know if it made sense. Let me know if this is the type of stuff you guys like to see, if you prefer other types of episodes. Do you have any ideas of business episodes you'd like me to cover? I'm always open to it. So hit me up. And until next time, guys, get money.